right, we're talking about some of the challenges that come with going outdoors and practical ways that we can overcome those challenges. So I'm coming to you, Dr. Tim. I know you've done a lot of research that will be extremely valuable to our viewers. What have you experienced to be some of the challenges when taking the learning outdoors?
Yeah, well, I think we've already heard some of them, and certainly some of the maybe some of the apprehensions that teachers might have also about taking learning outdoors. So things like being able to maintain a reasonable degree of control of the class. We talked about weather conditions, and I think Steve said earlier that there's no such thing as bad weather; that there's just a bad clothing, basically. And we also saw the issue with having the right tools in the environment to support the learning, things to lean on when you're writing and so on, all that kind of stuff. And I think this highlights some of the points around taking learning outdoors, because there's a whole messy world out there that is potentially quite difficult to prepare for sometimes when you go out. One of the first things that will typically happen with any class when they go outside, if you take them to an environment that's not super familiar to them, then you're going to have a period where actually they're busy learning about the environment. They're not really learning about the lesson that you want to teach them in that environment. So there'll be a lot of focus of the attention on the world that they've just entered. This will also typically result in some increased sort of socialization, right? It's a safety in numbers kind of thing that plays out, where the kids will actually talk to each other more, and they will form allegiances, and all of this kind of bonding will go on to feel safe in this new environment that they find themselves in. So I think from a teaching perspective, it makes sense to accept that this is going to happen. Don't consider it as a failing or as a weakness of anything. It's just a matter of fact. It's the way that we've evolved to be, and so allow it to play out before you try and do the teaching. Otherwise, it's going to get super frustrating. And I was out with a class a few months ago, and we were doing some planting of trees for an endangered squirrel population in our village, and the first few minutes was just a lot of excitement, a lot of running around, a lot of learning about just how muddy it was today, and how slippy the floor was, and so on, and people forming their little groups. That had to happen, and then we could have the lesson about, well, this is how you actually plant the tree. This is sort of why we're doing this. This is what the squirrels need, and so on. So I think it's just understanding that this will happen and not being afraid of it, I think.
Yeah, I think that the part of it is also is from the teacher's perspective, you have to plan, and part of that planning is, take in the space. Take a second, take a minute, give them the opportunity to check out the space, learn the space, have that feeling in there so that you can then go forward and do what is necessary in the space. As you say that, I'm starting to feel things myself, when you go to a new spot or a new place and you got to, check it out a little bit, see where it is that you are, take in your environment. That
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. I like that.
Steve, you have to leave room for curiosity as well. That's really important. And, a lot of the prepared lessons in classes, we know where they're going to get to, we know what they're going to do. You take them out of doors, they discover things you weren't expecting. In the classroom, learning is kind of, you're on a track and you pretty much know where it's going to go. Outside, you've got to leave room for curiosity, but curiosity is the value, and when you get it back, then there's a challenge for the teacher. Think about how do you curate those experiences. Saying to next year's kids, well, last year they found baby jellyfish. That's not the way to do it. Leave the space, let them discover. Give them a scientific method, give them the little tools to let them look around, but leave space for curiosity, and you won't be disappointed.
James, with your insight, which resources, furnitures are designed, to overcome some of these challenges with your expertise?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, just listening to Tim, it's whenever we change something anywhere, we notice that, of course, children will immediately start to question it and be curious. and so when we do that inside, it's the same. If we put them on wobble stools, if we put them on chairs with wheels, there's always this nervousness that actually they will spin around. They will do something that you weren't expecting them to do. And yes, of course they will do. We will do. Trust me, I have a new electric car, and I'm doing all sorts of things that I will get used to, and then we'll never do again. That's just our nature. I mean, in terms of actually practically outside, it's a case of trying to think of the landscape as our friend, consider it as part of the environment, the learning environment, and to therefore create specific spaces within it that will do certain things. And the two natural ones, I guess, are shelters. Now, I was brought up on a farm on Exmoor, and so to me a shelter was absolutely a bushcraft thing that we would go out and build. But you sort of recognise that's perhaps not necessarily the most practical thing on a daily basis in a school. Over the pandemic, where there was a lot of outdoor learning, we worked with an architectural practice called O'Donnell Brown to develop a studio system which just gave shelter from absolute extremes of weather. So rain, the reality is we're not going to go outside and probably do a math test in the middle of a rainstorm. But ultimately, it's nice just sometimes to have those types of spaces that we can retreat to. And it's a bit of a halfway house as well, because again, if there's any nervousness about actually doing any of this, it's starting to be, well, we'll go out into the outdoor classroom, despite the fact that that feels a bit of an anathema. And the other one is, and a space that a lot of people are recreating outside, which are outdoor amphitheatres, external amphitheatres, so to cutting terraces into landscapes. There's a fantastic one. I was reading a book by Prakash Nair recently about biophilia, and there's a fantastic one at Swarthmere College in Pennsylvania, which is gorgeous. There's some lovely ones in the American Embassy School in Delhi, and they're both very, very different. One's very hard, one is very soft. I was brought up, in Devon. Dartington Hall has these beautiful terraces which create natural amphitheatres, and so it's using the landscape to create those types of spaces for you, but also zoning, because we're taking that bit that we understand about successful learning environments, of zoning, of having different areas for different things, so students understand that, and they are designed and built in that way. Some of it is landscaping. I mean, we're looking at ways in which, therefore, we can start to build some of those things as off-the-shelf units, because we recognise not all schools will have that opportunity. Not everybody has got fantastic land and grounds which they can cut into an amphitheatre, for example.
A wonderful example with that, and I love a good amphitheater. You see it, you can imagine all the people there, how it can be used, the presentation that can take place there, the communication. Excellent example. Catriona, what practical solutions would you like to share as supporting and overcoming some of those challenges that we've discussed with what you've experienced?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting to hear James talk about the amphitheatre, because we have one just outdoors here, and I was just thinking about all of the incredible experiences that they create for the students, particularly when you think about voice projection, and you can ask people to sit in different places in the amphitheatre, and to get the students to think about their presentation skills, even if they won't be doing it outdoors in an amphitheatre in the future. I mentioned it previously that it was this idea of having the outdoor learning sort of carved into your planning and into your curricular week, if you like. And I think for practitioners that are maybe in a more urban setting and don't necessarily have the range of sort of expansive nature that we probably conjure an image up of when we talk about these things. One thing that's really worked in a few cities that I lived in and worked in was actually going off-site and finding where are our local spots that are a good space for us to take children to just get that movement, get that learning outdoors, get that experience of being there. That's one option. Another option that we found to be really handy in other schools is doing a sort of nature-based week and taking natural resources outdoors and having that moment of that week to be expressive and to be outdoors in nature. and to take the learning experiences out there. That again is dependent on what the school's expectations are, or whether or not that would be possible. And then I think when you think about this idea of what I think both Tim and Stephen mentioned it in the studio, this idea of there's not one thing, it's only bad clothing, there's never bad weather. I think it's about trying to change the mindset of everybody. So parents, teachers. I don't love being outdoors on the rain on duty, but actually when I see the learning opportunities that the children get through, like, you know, play with puddles and looking at how different textures change when they're wet, that makes it, and as an outdoor educator, I really feel that the children are learning something from that experience. So change your clothing is probably my first tip, but change your mindsets. And also look at this idea of risk. You know, are we being too risk averse as adults? We also let children climb trees outside here, and the children are able to manage their own risk when they're in that experience. They can figure out, you know, when they're going too high. And even though as an educator, as a practitioner, you might look at it and think, oh, and other adults in the environment also definitely feel that way. So it's about changing people's mindsets and changing that idea of risk, but also being inclusive about the learners that you do have. So we might not have students who are all able to manage that sort of experience, and being able to give all of our learners an experience that gives them an opportunity to be at one with nature is important. So looking at levels, if you don't have a space where you've always got resources outdoors and available, if you've got things that you take in and out, making sure that every child that we have can access that in a fair way, I think is important too.
And being a school leader, I mean, I was a school principal for many, many years. A big piece of that, making everybody kind of come into the fold of that, is the management of it. You got to plan, you know, think about where you, especially in the urban situation, where are great places to go? How can you get there safely? How can you get them back safely? You know, how much time do you need to be out there? You know, what is, you know, so as much as, you know, we love to be outside and stuff, there is the practical management of it as well. I think earlier on you had mentioned something about an outline or a format that you have in order to take kids out. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we have like what we call like a field trip bank. So for example, this is somewhere where it's very close proximity to the school, and we've assessed the risk. So we've done the risk assessment, we've done the walk, we've done the journey, we've figured out how long it would take us with speedier learners who tend to be the old ones, you know, how long it actually physically takes with the younger learners who tend to walk slower. Do we need to take snacks? And so we have this bank, if you like, of local places that we can just rotate on going on. And I think that actually instead of having like quite often schools will send a letter to say, we're going to go on this trip, please sign the form and give your consent. Parents at the beginning of the year would generally consent to going to those places, and then the teachers are free to do that and weave that into their planning every term. So that's again quite a practical way of supporting opportunities outside. And through project-based learning as well, there's also an opportunity to not forget about the local community. So even though we're focusing predominantly on the outdoors, it could be a trip on like through the outdoors that goes to somewhere that really relates and connects the learning to the community. So that would be like another field trip bank that we might have. So outdoors and also community-based.
Yeah, we're going to look at some examples of that a little bit later. But it's also, Steve, it's really important to keep a sense of perspective. You know, people with the kind of health and safety hat on, they become kind of a little bit obsessed with their own context. And when you look around the world, what we're doing now, we're chatting halfway around the world, perfectly normal for everybody this side of the pandemic. You know, those kids in Silkeborg in Denmark who climb trees, and they're up 30, 40 foot. They're really up and high, you know. And when I first saw this, I took a photograph and said, you know, wow. And they said, why are you taking a photograph? I said, well, because there are some schools around the world that would be surprised to see this. And they looked astonished. They said, well, but there are trees everywhere. If we didn't teach the kids to climb trees, think of the danger they'd be in. You know, so they see the whole act of learning out of doors as being protecting the children against the dangers of outdoor, which many of us did with bicycles. You know, we taught them to ride bicycles safely before we sent them off on them. And you know, when you look around 2.2 billion children around the world, a lot of them have the most horrendous journeys to school. You know, I'm doing work in Southeast Asia. The kids to get to school, they have to get across the river. They get into an inflatable lorry in a tube. It swings across the river on a bit of string. They get out, they swing back. Well, I'll tell you what, you try doing that. You try modeling that. You think of the physics, think of the maths, think of the teamwork. So looking at other kids' journeys to school, modeling them yourself, you know, building that empathy with their experience is good. But I'll tell you what, the maths and the science and the physics and the excitement, because there are bad things in the river, not just you in the lorry in a tube, you know, that's all part of it. And sad sometimes, you see kids have these amazing journeys to school. They arrive at school, they kind of dust off all that, get on with learning about glacial scenery or something in the middle of Cambodia. Then this horrendous journey back. The journey was the learning experience. And so bringing that in to the classroom really mattered. James and I have been doing work with building learning for some of our Olympic teams. And they never wanted to go into the classroom to learn the stuff about, you know, penalty corners or whatever. Until out on the pitch, they went for a thing called Thinking Thursdays, where every Thursday the whole pitch was different. You know, you'd arrive and the goals, instead of being on the ends, were on the side, so you got a wide, short pitch. The minute that started happening, they wanted to get back into a learning space to learn the detail to take back outside. So this is a virtual circle. You know, this is stimulating their engagement and their curiosity and their learning, and the outdoor feeds the indoor and the indoor feeds the outdoor, and it's all better than the single mode we used to do.
There you go. Excellent. Thank you. Well, hey, thank you again for all of your fantastic, amazing insights and practical takeaways. Now, for the last part of this webinar, I'd like to take a look to the future and think about what opportunities and ideas we can share to inspire our viewers' approaches to outdoor learning.